Well, I thank you for the opportunity to pick your brain, so to speak, pick your consciousness, find out what you can tell me about IVF, because this is something that just I encountered as a result of studying and researching and looking for children who have these special memories of birth, womb time, conception, and preconception. And I'm just overloaded with stories of preconception, of being in heaven and choosing mommy and daddy. And those are abundant. There's no lack of that. And there's many womb memories. There's many birth memories. Conception memories are the rarest group.
Really?
And I don't know if it's too taboo a topic, and the parents that hear these stories won't talk about it, or they don't understand or appreciate what's happening, or the child himself doesn't remember. I don't know the reasons, but it's very, very limited. I'll just share one experience that Dr. Okado in Japan sent me, and he knew I was looking for more stories. He says, I don't know if this is a conception memory, but the mother believes it is. And it was a child who wasn't even 1 year old. And mommy and daddy were in the living room, and he somehow he communicated. I don't think he had much speech ability, but he communicated to mommy and daddy, mommy, lie down on the floor. So he had mommy lying on the floor. Then he had daddy lying on top of mommy. And then he went below the waist on daddy and made a whoosh, whoosh. I'm number one.
Cool.
Wow. So we feel it is a conception memory of a child talking about actually the sperm race. And we have a couple other children who drew pictures of one Japanese boy drew pictures of the whole embryological sequence. And the parents brought it to a professor who said, this is, very immature, but these are the exact stages of fetal development and the whole thing all the way to the birth. So that, and another little girl talked about being number one and winning the race to her mother. So there seems to be some support that this could be some recollection of that. And then I found some IVF memories, which I put in this category of conception. So, but they are not abundant either. They're very limited. I interacted with one mother in Canada who had a very troublesome experience with her oldest IVF child. And then she had a natural child after him, and then another IVF. And in between, also an IVF that ended in a child living 22 minutes and had heart defects. So it was she was very transparent about all this. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at any of that article I sent you that was on Substack, but I want to refresh myself on just a few highlights of that, just to remind you. And if you want to comment on that, that would be interesting to me to see from your expertise what you're picking up on this, because this is all new to me. I had not looked into IVF when I found this story and several others. The little 5-year-old boy awoke in the night, shivering and shaking, with his teeth chattering and claiming, I am freezing. The mother said this has been happening more and more with John in the last 3 months. When I touch him, his body temperature is normal. And I asked him, he said he was having a dream. What is your dream about? There are just these little circles. My instincts, the mother says, tell me this is related to being frozen as an embryo for 3 months. I can't make sense of it otherwise. John had his first night terror, such as this. This is at 5 years old. His first one goes back to the age of 2. He has had over 20 in the past 3 years. They began to happen more frequently in the last 6 months. And in the last 30 days, he's had 5. He is afraid to go to bed. He doesn't want to have these dreams. I don't want to close my eyes. My brain won't let me. I asked, what are you thinking about? I can't describe it. So she asked him to draw what his experience was in his dream. And he drew a jagged rock or a mountain and said, it is sharp and powerful like a lightning bolt. So that's the basic content of what he's been going through. And I was just curious, from your side, how would you deal with something like this?
Mm-hmm. First of all, his psyche is doing something we call spotlighting, which means it's shining a light on an implicit memory that it wants everybody to see, mom and dad and therapists. So we call that spotlighting. Something gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and pretty soon it's just undeniably in your face. We've got to do something about this. We have to listen to that. So it means he's developed in his family uh, field a coherence that he feels safe enough for the scary stuff to start to bubble up.
Mm-hmm.
The cold, I've often with frozen sperm or frozen embryos had to encounter issues of coldness and freezing and thawing and what to do about all that. I had a boy who was frozen, thawed, and then frozen, and then thawed again.
Wow.
And you know what's so funny? His lips were bright red, like pink, like he'd been sucking on a popsicle. They were just cherry red.
Mm.
I don't know what the relationship, if any, that might be to having been frozen twice, but it just stood out when I was working with him. It's scary to be conceived with IVF processes. We're so vulnerable. The younger we are, the more vulnerable we are. So a 1-day-old baby is much more vulnerable than a 1-year-old baby.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the only time this isn't true is at birth because a newborn baby is actually more vulnerable than a 9-month-old baby because they've just been through this very intense, shocking
Mm-hmm.
experience. So, except for that one little window, the more vulnerable a person is, it has a really strong relationship to where they are, how old they are, how fully developed they are. So when we look at sperm and eggs, they're very vulnerable cells.
Mm-hmm.
Sperm are just, a dime a million, you could say. And, all of the sperm die in the conception process, including the one that wins the race. His body is dissolved and he delivers the centriole and his haploid genes. And you have as much sperm energy actually as I do, or at conception anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we look at the stages of um, natural conception, there are many stages. There are at least 12 that we can identify physiologically, embryologically, biologically, And each one of those 12 stages have its own set of, let's say, its own set of rules, its own set of, its own encounters of danger, because if they're not met and surpassed, the organism doesn't survive. And I guess the soul that was with it goes back to where we all come from.
Mm-hmm.
So in a normal, in a normal natural conception, there's the sperm reaching the cubulus orifice cells that are around the egg. I love your picture, by the way. It's very colorful, very eggy. So the sperm reaches, and many sperm reach the cumulus orifice. And those cells are kind of they're loose. They've come away from the adhesion to the egg itself, and apparently they emit a kind of a pheromone or something that sperm knows. Sperm has sensory
Mm-hmm.
features on its top of its head, so it actually has a nose that could kind of sniff out where the egg is, and it helps the sperm orient toward the egg. So the cumulus orifice, I consider to be stage one of conception, says to the sperm, "Hi, you come on in. You've reached the holy palace, and
Mm-hmm.
welcome." And then, boom, the sperm slams his head into the corona radiata, which are these solid, hard-packed cells that cover the egg cell. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I liken the corona radiata to the pawns on a chessboard protecting the queen. You got to get through us to get to the zona pellucida. So that's stage two of normal conception. Stage three is the zona pellucida and meeting the zona pellucida. And it's a very interesting moment because, many people I've helped have felt like the zona pellucida, the egg opened up and invited a special sperm in, so that the egg chose the sperm.
Mm-hmm.
Some people experienced that the egg didn't want that sperm, and another sperm somehow got in. Some people feel like they're identified with a certain sperm. That's the one that got in, and because of his efforts to get in, she had to let him in. I'm anthropomorphizing the cells, obviously, here. But so the zona pellucida phase is the third. Let's see, corona, radiata, zona pellucida. Inside the zona pellucida, there's a perivitellin space. It's a fluid-filled space, and very rarely, but sometimes even two sperm can get in there. But usually, the cortical granules have created this a block that keeps all the other sperm out. And it's like a swimming pool. I've had people regress to the stage and done research, and the perivitellin space, it is like a warm sea for some people. Experiences it as relax. I'm in here.
Mm-hmm.
So that's maybe the fourth stage
Wow.
conception. And then the sperm head, if this is the vitelin, the inner egg, the sperm comes along sideline and lands on it like this. And on the side of its neck are receptor sites. And in the vitelin, there are like these hairs, these vitelin fingers. And the head of the sperm lands on this vitelin space, and the fingers penetrate the head. They surround the head. There's a real crown of thorns image that happens here, where the sperm head is, nailed and stuck to the vitelin, and the tail is lost, and the sperm head begins to dissolve. I guess we're on step five now. I'm not sure. I'm losing track in the moment. But then the sperm goes ends the vitelin space, so it's in the inner sanctum of the egg. It's in the inner cytoplasm of the egg with the other organelles and things in there. And the sperm has to deliver the centriole, which is an organelle that allows cells to divide. Eggs do not have a centriole, so an egg cannot divide. It just go away unless it gets a centriole from the sperm. And obviously, the sperm also releases this tightly packed haploid chromosomes get in this cytoplasm. They have a chance to kind of expand. And they get packed into this little lunchbox size things that arrive with a Ferrari, and now they're on the inside and opening, and they become surrounded by an envelope. And meanwhile, the egg has seen what the sperm brings in. And I say that in a way, it's interesting. It's like she gets to read his cards, see his genetic material for a second, and then she finishes her last meiotic division and expels uh, the second polar body, and that she has a new set of haploid chromosomes after that. So that's another stage of conception. And then those chromosomes get surrounded by an envelope of their own. So you have these two envelopes that somehow they flow together in syngamy, and then when they meet each other, these circles, these blobs interdigitate, and eventually inside how they do it, I don't think anybody knows, but the individual genes chromosomes line up based on size. So I figure out who's the tallest on your side. Okay, let's put those guys together. Who's the smallest? We got this row of human architecture that's going to create form for this incoming soul. And those intermingled chromosomes have to divide. And when they pull apart, pieces stick from each other, other pieces stick to the other side, and they exchange this traits and create a new trait. And after the cell division is complete, the whole egg cell divides into two. And you go from a zygote to a two-cell blastocyst. So there's all of these stages that have to take place for normal conception. And when we look at what happens in an ICSI
Right.
conception, it's quite a different story. It's very short.
Yeah.
So
No comparison.
well, no. The orientation is different. Sperm get centrifuged. I forget what it is, like 15,000 times the force of gravity for 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And then they choose the biggest one, and then that gets frozen. Nothing like that happens in nature. But where's the soul while this is happening? How would a soul? It's been my experience, Elizabeth, when I look at prenatal traumas and birth traumas, that the soul does not want to embody into the traumatized part of the tissues. It's like if you cut your finger, you're like, "Ugh," you don't want to feel it. Who wants to feel a cut finger? And but when that finger heals, it's like, oh, okay, well, I can move back into it. And for me, when I've seen so many pre and perinatal wounds in people where they regress, they discover the wound, they discover what it did to them, the behavior pattern, belief systems kind of could keep them stuck in a way because they get constellated in the very tissue itself and also in the neurology. So when there's a really big wound there, soul doesn't want to be there. The soul doesn't want to be in that part. And when people heal those wounds, it's almost like they spread out and their soul inhabits more and more of their body. So imagine what IVF souls have to do with all these wounds. The ultimate wound is when you die, the soul doesn't want to stay in a dead body, so I think we know that souls don't like to stay in traumatized tissue.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so many parts of the IVF journey include major traumatizations, like, centrifuges,
Right.
like freezing, and like bypassing the fallopian tube and bypassing all those lovely stages of conception we were set up to do. Boom, with a sperm getting sucked into a pipette and injected, tail and everything, into the cytoplasm of the egg. So many of my IVF people have this shock, like something's going to come get them, something's going to come stab them. It's kind of got a deer in the headlights look to them. So many of them, when I'm working with them, I almost feel like their soul is tethered to them, like a helium balloon, but it's wanting to get all the way in, but there are all these roadblocks of contractions and compressions and trauma from all these interventions that they've been through. And then that egg gets, sucked up in from a pipette, and it gets put in a petri dish. Who knows? Neon lights, somebody having their lunch. I don't know. In the lab, what's going on? What kind of energy are they soaking up, exposed in vitro to the world? What's the world like for that tissue? And how will the soul want to or not want to experience what's happening to that tissue?
Mm-hmm.
And then it gets sucked up, and uh, after it's big enough, healthy enough, and it's a blastocyst, it gets sucked up with some other guys nearby, and it injected into the. Often they're lazy at the zone of lucidus. Hatching is easy, and successful implantation is more likely. Sometimes that lasering kills cells, burn cells. Sometimes it even kills the blastocysts. And then another shocking intervention here that has happened to people, that has happened to tissues of a human being that is developing a relationship with the soul of that human being.
Carlton, can I ask you to make some adjustment on your microphone to make
Yes.
it? Is there a way?
You want me to be louder?
Yeah. I don't hear all the words, and there's a lot of technical words that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah, well, maybe we can do subtitles when we do the video.
Right, right. Oh, you've given a big lesson there on all of these stages. It's amazing.
How's the
That's
voice?
that's real good now.
Is it adequate, or should I adjust my?
That is much improved. I can clearly hear you very well.
Great. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah.
So,
As you were going through that, it reminded me of Dr. Chamberlain's story that he relates in Windows to the Womb. It was from one of his colleagues relating this little girl as a baby would wake up every 2 hours crying. And not until she was like 2 years old or old enough to explain what was happening, she revealed the dreams that she was having. Dreams of men in white coats hovering above her with scissors and cutting, and if she was found it extremely frightening. So Dr. Chamberlain said, we're talking about, the trauma experienced in the Petri dish, and she's reliving it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with that story that he tells.
Yeah.
There's very few of these reports, though, very few.
Well, it's territory that is obscure in the first place. All the research being done in that territory now is being conducted by IVF funded research and laboratories. And back when I studied it, God, what was it? Ages ago. People were studying conception with this sort of amazed curiosity and
Mm-hmm.
identifying these stages that I'm talking about. And different researchers would look at the same moment, and some would see a sperm finding his way into the zona pellucida, and some would see the zona pellucida opening up and pulling the egg in. So we have this internal projection of individuals upon what they're seeing. It's kind of cute, I think. Someone's kind of looking through a microscope and sweating, what's going on in their own, conception getting activated.
Right.
I think my fear is that the souls born by IVF processes, how much agency does the soul have in that sort of a process? Do we choose our parents? Do we choose our birth? Do we choose our mother's pelvic size? Do we choose a petri dish? Maybe some souls.
I don't think we should assume all souls put them in one box and say they all have the same options. They all come from the same place. I think it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, sure. Sure it is. Sometimes I have to simplify things just so I can get my head around them. And I do a lot of therapeutic processes in individual sessions and in workshops. So I've always been driven by how can I help this person? So my myopic vision comes from just individual experiences. I don't know where we all come. Maybe we come from a void. Maybe we come from something so inexplicable, can't even imagine
Can I share one story there on that topic?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, Christianity speaks about heaven, hell. We have the Hindus that speak about all these different lokas. The Buddhists speak about many different realms. And one experience that we share in our second book, Cosmic Cradle, is from a woman that has some very interesting experiences. And when she was a young child, she would have out-of-body experiences. And at first she was very frightened by that, but then she became adapted to it. And someone took her under their wing. First, she encountered this, we could call him a guide or some astral being, said, "Oh, you better go back to your body. This isn't a good place for little girls, get back, get back." So she listened to him, and then he caught her the next time, and she pretended to go back, and then he realized that she was uncontrollable, that she wasn't going to listen to him. So he took her under his wing, and he's explored the astral worlds with her and showing her all kinds of things. And at one point in her life, maybe she was 5, 6 years old, her grandfather died. And her mother was explaining, "Oh, grandfather's gone back to heaven. He's with the angels, da, da, da." And the grandmother was listening and said, "He didn't go to heaven. He went straight to hell." And the reason for that is he wasn't the best partner. He was a womanizer, and she was quite upset about some of the things he had done in their marriage. And so this little girl was quite confused. Mother saying one thing, grandmother saying another. Where is grandpa? So when she had another out-of-body experience, she asked her guide, "What happens after death?" And so he took her kind of like it was like the valley of death, where, there's a beautiful valley with mountains on the side. And she saw on the ground these holes or openings, portals. And so she started exploring, and she looked into one, and she said, "Oh, what is this?" And it was, she saw people screaming and demons torturing people and the horrible smell. And he said, "Well, that's the Christian hell. Well, why are they in there? Why do they stay in there? They think they deserve it." Oh my goodness, she couldn't believe it. And then right next to it was another portal, and she looked in, and there were the angels with their harps, and God on the throne with Jesus. She said, "Well, this is the Roman Catholic heaven." And then she looked around, and there were all these portals with, here's the Buddhist heaven, and here's the Hindu, and here's the Native American. And this is where those people go who believe that life is about learning lessons, and that we have to, take on challenges and obstacles and all that. And this is where they go. And this is where the warriors go, those who want to come and do battle on earth. And then maybe there was one where she just looked in, and it was just this most divine, peaceful realm, and there was just one person in it. So there were all these options based upon the beliefs of the people. If they think they deserve hell, they'll go to hell. Eventually they'll realize they've had enough of hell, and they'll pop over to the Christian heaven. So it's not really eternal hell, but it's all based on the beliefs. So like a consensus reality. So to me, that makes some sense. And I believe some of these guides that help the people in these realms, when it's time to start planning their next earthly life, some of them may be in that same mindset. For example, those that are told that, for example, we have one fellow in our book, retired military officer, who had these memories from childhood of looking down in an assembly of souls, looking down at earth and picking parents. And he said he was given a choice of 3 couples. Couple number 1, number 2, and number 3. And number 1 was going to be an easy life, a very wealthy family. And he actually saw them engaged in sexual intercourse in their bedroom. So if he picked them, he would have gone into that situation. Second one was more middle class and middle of the road, pretty easy life, a few little bumps here and there. The third couple were a young couple coming along in their vehicle, actually on a ranch in Texas. And we met this fellow, his name is Rennie. And the couple's on their own private property coming along on a Sunday afternoon, and they're kissing and hugging, a young couple. And he's looking down, and the guide says, if you're born to this couple, life is going to be very difficult. You'll have many challenges. It's going to be hard to pass God's test. And he said, but if I choose that couple, won't my spiritual reward in the afterlife be greater? And the guide affirmed, yes, that's right, but that doesn't make it any easier. He said, well, that's the one I want. And the guide gave him 3 chances. Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure? It isn't going to be a piece of cake. And he said, I want to shoot for maximum salvation. That's what his mindset was. That was his mindset. I want to prove myself. I want maximum. And so he went, those are the parents that he was born to when he was 7 years old. he came home from school one day because he had memories of the whole process of choosing mommy and daddy and the whole scene of them having sex in the car and the little girl, his sister, sleeping in the back seat and all of the details. And at 7, he said, Mom, was I placed with you and Dad when you were in the front seat of a car? She said, we don't talk about that. That's not decent, son. And so he completely shut down. He would not talk about it again, but he never forgot. By the time he's 25, a married man in the military, I think, he decided, well, I don't hear other people talking about choosing their parents. Maybe there's some screw loose. Maybe I need some psychological help. I can't get these memories out of my mind. I'm going to go home and talk to Mom and Dad and get the record straight about this. So he made a special trip and sat Mom and Dad down. Can you tell me where I was conceived? Well, son, we can't remember that. That's over 25 years ago. How could we remember that? Okay. What if I supply some details? Could you confirm them? They said, yeah. So they weren't conceiving all their children in a car, and they happened to remember this one because it ended up to be absolutely 100%. So he started relating his whole memory, and the mother turned to the father and said, Gus, you haven't been talking to this boy, have you? And he says, no, Hilda, I'm not going to talk about that. And so they were red in the face. They were a very conservative German couple. And this is, he says, was it in that 1919 overland car? When I interviewed him in 1999, he was about 68, 69, something like that. So we're going back to earlier stage of how things operated here. But his parents were very, very shy about sex and didn't speak about it, didn't tell jokes about it. That was not a subject they ever talked about. So he confirmed everything with them. They never spoke about it again for the rest of their lives. And he was always feeling he was 10 steps ahead of everybody else because most people don't realize they've chosen their parents. They've chosen what path they want to take. And in his case, he knew he was going to have obstacles, and he certainly did. There were many, he had 3 marriages, after he lost his first 2 wives and ended up, when I met him, he was in his 3rd marriage. Some of the children died, 40 years old. One son died and left grandchildren for him to take care of. So there were all sorts of things and cancer surgeries, and it just goes on. It was a huge drama, his life. And but he felt comfort. He was a very happy, optimistic person, very intelligent, warm, loving guy. We really liked him. So anyway, there is a story of someone who chose that difficult path because it's irrational. Why would anybody do that? But that was his thinking about it, how things should be. So
you feel like
anyway, so we've encountered other things like that as well. Go ahead.
do you feel like IVF souls choose that option, or are they somehow maybe just curious about what's going on there and get sucked in? Or do you have any sense of your own about the relationship between a soul and this kind of onerous conception process?
I don't know if we can put them all in the same box. One of the adults we interviewed who has pre-birth memories and remembers past lives and the interlives and all that, she explained that in many cases following death, certain people feel very frightened to be without a physical body. And she said for her, she's has no problem, and she meets with her angels, and it's a glorious experience for her. But she said in some cases people are so used to that being in a body, they will take the next train back to Earth and grab whatever body is available. So I don't know if we can put it all in one set of circumstances. How did they come? Maybe some came that way. Maybe some wanted a super challenge, and they were willing to maybe they had some strong affiliation with the parents and wanted to be with them at any cost. We had one fellow with an adult with pre-birth memories who, when he was doing his pre-birth planning, he insisted that he wanted to be born to a particular father. He had a strong connection to that father, and the guide advised him, but you're going to have difficulties with the mother and the brother. No,
Whoa.
that's okay. I can deal with it. It's going
Oops.
to be okay. I love my father, that man. I want him to be my father, and it's just going to be wonderful. And I'm going to take it because I don't mind. It's worth it to get the father. So what happened to this particular person? He had a very close relationship with the father, and then the father got cancer when the boy was in high school. And he would take him to his medical treatments and help and support all that. But he lost his father, and as a result, he's left with the mother and the brother, and there are all kinds of conflicts. I won't go into all that, but so it's I can't give an answer that maybe there's something like that those parents aren't able to conceive naturally, and so he's going to take the chance and come in another way. Is this giving you an idea of how it's not going to be the same everywhere, but there's certain patterns you can see along?
Yeah. Yeah, I have had I've conducted many embodiment classes where we do the sperm journey, and then we do the egg journey, and then we do the conception journey. And I've done a lot of these with a lot of different types of people in a lot of different countries. And uh, a theme that comes and goes, is pretty powerful, is the sense that all the time we're surrounded by souls that want to get a body no matter what. They're like looking down and go, I want to know what it tastes like to have a cup of coffee. I want to feel that first kiss that we saw these guys do or something like that. And so sometimes I feel like we're surrounded by souls wanting to get here because we're a very special piece of real estate in this cosmos.
Yeah.
So maybe it's like, okay, I'll take it, or maybe I want that dad, or maybe, well, if this is the only way and I'm going to lose another chance, I'll get sucked in, and I get sucked in. And that's such a different story than other stories I've experienced with people who are really pretty sure they chose their parents and had a life that had the vibration that they were expecting by that choice of those parents.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I can tell you something about my personal story. I don't know if I've shared this much, but you know, I, I couldn't figure out why I would have chosen these parents. I had such a hard childhood, and life just seemed unfair most of the time. And then I got into the pre and perinatal studying, and I did regressions. I found out what my birth was like. And I had all these discoveries that were reasons not to choose those parents. Uh,
Mm.
and I had to actually kind of convince myself to stop blaming them for all my troubles because, they're my troubles. They're mine somehow. They're mine, so I have to accept them as mine and stop blaming my parents. But I just had this feeling of like, get it. I want to know why I would choose these parents. And I have helped a lot of people discover why they chose parents they didn't think they wanted. But I couldn't find my own until my mom was dying from ALS. And
Mm.
I lived in Denver, and my mom and dad lived up in the hills outside of Denver. And I would go, which was really on her way down. I went up there 4 or 5 times a week, and I would go buy organic juices to make up at their house and then put them into her G tube, and she'd light up for a little while. And I had really good relationship with her during her dying process. It was wonderful. We spent some time looking back at family albums
Mm.
and seeing them in a different way than the way we had interpreted them before. We would look at a smile and I would say, "But Mom, look at your eyes." She goes, "I know I look miserable. I'm just smiling, but I'm so upset. I'm so sad." She started getting really real to me.
Mm.
And I regretted having isolated myself from her really vigorously for a while because I blamed her for so much pain that I thought she caused me. And anyway, my dad called me 3 in the morning one night, said, "You got to get up here. Your mom's dying." And so I raced up, in my pajamas in the car, ran into the house, and into their bedroom. And I'd seen her, ALS people have a hard time breathing as they die because their lungs stop working and they get fluid. We were always sucking fluid out of her throat so she could get clearance, so she could breathe. And she couldn't talk anymore, but we were writing and communicating with eye contact, and it was so lovely. And I got there and she had passed out from hypoxia, right?
Mm.
She wasn't getting enough oxygen and she couldn't she passed out, and my dad thought she had died.
Mhm.
Got there, I sat down on the bed with Mom, and my dad was on the floor crying,
Mm.
beating the floor, saying, "No, no." I'd never seen him so real and vulnerable. And my mom woke up, and,
Mm.
and she was on this side of me. I'm here, the bed's ends here, my dad's here. Somehow she slid off over me and off the bed and into my dad's arms.
Mm.
And they embraced. And I
Mm.
just got chills down my spine. I saw that embrace of love, and
Mhm.
everything else just disappeared. It was like they were coming at me and the world was going away from me. It was like, when I was like, I chose their passion for me,
Mhm.
despite the many other things that I got.
Despite what?
All the other things I regretted about
Right.
that
Right.
relationship
Yeah. Yeah.
resonated. That was so powerful. It overtook other considerations that I was able to make in the moment as a guest and embodying soul.
Mhm. That's beautiful.
Yeah, well, thank you. So I just thank you. I don't know how I heard that, maybe to some friends, but it feels good to share it again. Thank you
Yeah.
for
Yeah. 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 The beauty of their love was irresistible to you. And even though maybe it wasn't always expressed even to each other because of the circumstances that we all face, things aren't so ideal. There's a lot of stress and strain that keeps people from being who they really are. So
mm-hmm.
you were seeing who they really were and got to have that at the end also.
That moment made a big difference in my experience of being a human being on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
because it was outside of this realm, that experience.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, it's a very interesting area to investigate as you're going into all the things you're investigating. There are so many mysteries to try to uncover on our journey here.
You know, one of the things that I teach my baby therapists, not my baby therapists, these lovely colleagues that are curious about learning all they can. I did an IVF class for them, and we charted the levels of shock involved from different interventions.
Hmm.
So, like let's say in a normal vaginal birth, maybe the very hardest part of the birth is when the pelvis is at the narrowest point, and we have to rotate our heads like no other mammals, and we get this compressions and drag forces that we see in people's craniums for their life. So that is maybe not shocking, maybe it's traumatic, but it is a place where the soul is like, whoa, did I sign up for this? This is pretty heavy. And so we started grading the shock levels of different interventions. And for example, an ICSI conception we thought was much more shocking than, pouring the sperm over the egg in a petri dish and letting them work it out. Centrifuge sperm were more shocking, harder to embody into than sperm who were not centrifuged.
Mm-hmm.
Frozen embryos were harder to embody into than embryos who were not frozen. So these impediments to embodiment for IVF souls are much bigger and greater and harder to heal and uh, harder to harder to heal, harder to get the soul to be in body and in congruency with the body because of these, really terrifically intense interventions on these vulnerable cells.
Yeah.
And so I've worked with babies who've had consequences from a lot of these different interventions. One of them had they were twins, and both a boy and a sister were so dizzy they could never stop spinning. The way they played, the way they ran around the room, they were both centrifuge sperm. They could try to relate to each other while they were playing. They're also both being still spun. This whole idea of how a shocking experience stays in us and with us until we resolve it. And I've been with so many IVF babies who just don't touch me, don't anything feels like a stab. My egg cell was completely violated and bent and pushed in, and that's shocking, very shocking. So, how can you later engage in intimacy or physical contact without dealing with that kind of a shocking intervention from your embodiment process? So, IVFs have way more interventions at these very early stages that make it harder for
Yeah.
a soul to have a really luscious, beautiful relationship with the body they get.
Yeah. I think coming from some of these higher dimensions, it's quite shocking for the soul to experience what life is like on planet Earth.
Yeah.
I guess they wanted to get involved in an experiment and see what it's like to experience this dualistic duality where
Mhm.
there's so many challenges.
I've got a question for you, Elizabeth. Do you have a nickname or has it always been Elizabeth? That's not my question. I just somehow I remember Carmen. Oh, that's your
Yeah,
last name. Well, that's why.
yeah, some people get it mixed up, might start calling me Carmen. No, it's
Yeah,
Elizabeth Carmen.
yeah. I have that happen too. So, Terry,
Oh
nice.
yeah, your name is tricky also.
To-
Could be either way.
My question is one I've been curious about for ages, and it has to do with the relationship of the soul to a physical body. And I would approach this question with various sub questions like, is the soul inside the body? Or is the soul outside the body? Or is it both? Or is the body just sort of like this receptor site for things that are out there that are the soul? The body is just a mechanism. I would I would say, Elizabeth, uh, what is the relationship between soul and a body for you?
Well, I've encountered a lot of different stories on that topic. One of them comes from someone that claims this is their first incarnation into a human body, and they saw the human body as kind of like a machine. They had to learn how to use it. And she gave one example of she would be tripping and falling and bumping into things, and her mother, all bruised up all the time and hurting herself. And her mother, at one point, says, "Use your eyes, look where you're going, use your eyes." And for her, she had like 360-degree vision. She could see in all. And to look out of her eyes, she felt like it was just two pinholes now to look at reality, and the rest wasn't there. But that's what she had to do in order to function in a physical body. So she looked at the body as uh, you know a vehicle, an instrument, something you have to, like your computer, you have to learn how to navigate on it. So that was her first experience. That's the only one that I remember that was their first time being in a physical body. I think after that, when you start coming in, you will remember how the body operates. That particular person that I'm referring to, her name is Anelia Benz. I don't know if you've heard that name. And she's written some books, and has a small following. Kind of, she doesn't want to be on center stage or on a throne or anything like that. So she's very low key. And she speaks about the human body elemental. And she's somebody we interviewed for our book because she had some very interesting memories. The human body elemental having its own consciousness, separate from the soul, and it's kind of like a marriage. There is a marriage of body and soul. So that's one way I could add a little bit to that question you're asking.
And I've written a little article called The Implantation Journey, and I've studied implantation for decades, and I've literally been around hundreds of people doing implantation regressions and processes. And one of the things that kind of created a curiosity in me is that if the say there's no soul, or the soul comes into the body at some point in time, like the Catholic Church used to say, they at one point they said the soul in men embodies at birth, but it takes a year for the soul of a woman to embody. So it's all this nonsense.
Yeah.
But if you embodied into a cluster of cells, and those cluster of cells had a mom who ate hot sauce, freaked out all the time about the news, and had this certain vibration, those existing cells have that vibration, and there's a memory in those cells. So when the soul goes in there, that's the body that they inhabit, and they feel everything that happened to that physical body.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had people feel like that's what they've done. I've also had people feel like during conception, the soul has a kind of a radiant fog around the sperm and the egg chromosomes and or even the cells themselves. And the soul can kind of be sometimes or experiencing sperm process, and it gets a little shocking for the sperm, and then all of a sudden they're experiencing the egg process, and the egg feels like she's inviting the sperm, but then suddenly another sperm barges in, and that's shocking for her, and the same person feels themselves as that other sperm, like I'm going to get in no matter what. So it's like the soul simultaneously experiencing the processes of both cells and also taking turns which cell they inhabit depending upon the shock levels of either cell. I thought
Mm.
that was a very interesting way to look at how the soul has a relationship with flesh, with cells.
Yeah. 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 Uh, One of the mothers that I interviewed who ended up having about 6 children um, explained that she was having pre-birth communications prior to even conception, maybe years before she even got pregnant with the child.
Mhm.
And that the soul, the way she explained it from her experiences, the soul has dibs on a particular, baby. And once conception happens and all that, I don't. It's possible. Also, there could be a switch at some point, and one soul may decide to leave and another come in. That's another option. Things can be very complicated. But having dibs on that particular mother and her, and she would also explain how each one of her pregnancies, the baby prior to even conception had its own energy, its own feeling. It was unique, and each pregnancy was unique for her also. Uh, I, there's lots of different stories that come to mind here as you're talking.
I've got one more I wanted to share, and I kind of got to get going, but can I
Yeah.
share this one with you?
Pardon me?
And I'm going to share another one with you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I have a dear friend whom I love, whom I believe is totally credible, trustworthy, congruent, intelligent, sensitive, and he has had 3 near-death experiences.
Mm.
And what has happened is, yeah, he felt like each time a different soul came into his body.
Mm.
That soul kind of knew the body and knew the history, but had a lot of catching up to do what it's actually like to be in that body. And it's all wonky after this near-death experience and kind of in a tailspin for a while. But the signature of that body's life had the same strong enough resonance that a different soul could relate to and be in it and have the same memories. This body was with my puppy when we went swimming that day because the soul is inhabiting the body with that memory, even though it's a different soul. And he said the same thing happened in his most recent near-death experience. Is that he said, I'm a different soul. I look the same, I have the same memories, but I'm a different soul. And when he says that, you have to believe it. It's because he's so truthful, and at least for him, he's positive. And for me, I'm like, who knows? I'm curious about anything that can explain why we're here and what we're supposed to do while we're here. So I thought that was an interesting aspect of.
Well, that goes back to what I said earlier about the idea that there's a marriage between the soul and the physical body. And in this case, that physical body is carrying the memories of his whole incarnation, and a different soul comes in and just picks up, and there's no problem.
Yeah, I,
Also, you've heard the stories of heart transplants where there was one famous case where a woman had a heart transplant from a motorcycle accident where the fellow was on his way to get chicken McNuggets or something, and she never ate that, and she never wanted to do anything with motorcycles. But once she had a new heart from that particular person, her interest in even in what she ate changed. I don't remember the name of the book, but it seems like there's a book out on that, on her case alone. It's a bestseller
well,
back
I
so many.
think there are cellular biologists and certainly quantum cellular engineers who will tell you that sperm has an experience that influences it, the egg has an experience that influences it, and those experiences merge in myriad ways of expressing themselves. But that vibration is carried by all the daughter cells. So every cell in our body has some kind of actual little physical memory or kind of a metaphysical memory of our birth and our sperm journey. And
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
that because I can walk into a room of people who've never done a sperm journey and talk to them about what it's like and how to access it, how to remember it. You have a room full of people getting different specific memories about their sperm journey and their father's breath and their mother's reluctance. Was there alcohol involved? Was it rapish? Was it glorious? And these are memories, Elizabeth, that are implicit memories. They're not made up. They're not invented by the mind. Pure truth.
right. Yeah, yeah. I think there's a marriage of body and soul, and the body is not just some inert physical matter. It has some consciousness.
I agree. Yeah. Did I answer the questions about IVF that you want to ask?
Well, I just want to make a statement here about my experience with pre and perinatal psychology, hearing so many wonderful traumatic imprints being healed, sometimes just with a quick conversation with a child about, we didn't want to get pregnant and we weren't happy about it. And, now we love you and we're happy you're here. But that particular child, the surprise baby, one of these cases, uh, just hearing that conversation from a parent can change their whole relationship. And so I've
Yeah,
heard stories
truth
like
comes
that.
out.
Wendy, yeah, the Wendy McCarty gives those examples, and others. So I was wondering if in the area of IVF, have we come to the point where we can have a quick turnaround of some traumatic imprinting, or is it a little bit more complicated and takes more time?
My experience with IVF is that it's much more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more complex. The interventions are more interventions and there are a greater number of interventions, and the interventions are much more powerful with their influence.
Yeah.
And so there are many of them, and each one of them has a different relationship with the other one. So it's a very complex puzzle for me, with helping IVF souls, babies, and adults. I've worked with both, find a way to come home and be safely in their bodies. It's just much harder for them. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think intense cathartic regressions are probably not a good idea for some IVF babies because they're so traumatized. You could just activate trauma that will get in the way of possible healing. So you have to do empowerment processes with IVF people. And I love handing a stick. I have a broomstick in my practice that represents a needle, and I hand that stick to IVF kids, and sometimes they stab bellows with it, and sometimes they get scared and run away with it. Sometimes they need to have power over it. And after a while, okay, I've told my story. You saw it, mom and dad and therapists. And whew, that's what it was like to get ICSI from the point of view of the sperm, and then you got to do it from the point of view of the egg. And there's all these different multiple interactive and interlocking relationships between the various shocks and traumas.
Mhm.
My experience is it's a lot harder.
Yeah. I'm wondering if in some cases the therapy or the process has to take place when they're more mature, when they're adults, and they can just do a technique, some kind of a processing technique to release fear or anger or whatever. If they could find something more, if something like that would work. I know with the other cases in pre and perinatal, I think the earlier you catch them, the better. But in
Yep.
this case, maybe I don't know. That's just a thought that came to me that maybe, and I don't know.
It's such tricky territory. I've had the most success with finding a way for the person to tell their story about only one thing, and stick to one thing until that one thing is
Mm-hmm.
discovered and examined, and its consequences are understood and it's processed and shared. Then it can kind of come out of the system. But a technique that doesn't go that deep is just superficial, and whatever happens underneath comes back to its old shape and form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Gotta get in there and unwind that stuff respectfully and slowly with a lot of empowerment, encouragement. So much agency is lost in the IVF embodiment journey.
Mm-hmm. Now, going back, I don't know if you have any more time, but that case that you shared, we put it in our book, and I've seen many PDF versions on the internet about the little girl, Mommy, my brothers and sisters are crying and they're stuck in the snowbank and we have to do that, something. How did that ever get resolved in terms of they felt, did she get over those nightmares?
Yeah, after sharing them, she got over them. The nightmares didn't come back, uh, or not. They didn't come back while I was still seeing them. They may have come back later, and they often do to get fully resolved. My memory is that talking about it, and their mom talked about it with her, and their mom and dad talked about it with me, and all of the sharing kind of helped settle out the anxiety she was having and the energized aspect of her psyche that was spotlighting that issue so it could come up and we could see it. What else? There's something else. Yeah, but she still had this sense of like, there's been an injustice done in the world.
Mm,
Still had that. And I don't know if it was linked to that, but when I was sitting with her, she sure felt like it. Even after she processed it and released it, she was still, part of her was still formed by that act and that thing that was going on in the field of her little mini cosmos. It's kind of clumsy way to put it, but yeah, I've got more, but it lingered.
Yeah. Well, that freezing experience, that's come up there in that case, and it came up in the case I brought up earlier about the little boy in Canada. He was freezing, his teeth were chattering, he was
Yeah.
shivering. And then another case was someone who was a caretaker for two IVF children. They were as infants and toddlers. She was just a caretaker and not a professional person trying to do any healing. But what she shared with me is that these two boys would often hug each other because they were cold and they wanted to get warm inside. They were freezing. So they would often be hugging, and she could only theorize that they were having some experience related to their IVF. So it's interesting. In the few cases that I have, and one of them is your case here with the little girl and the siblings in the snowbank, but two other cases of freezing, and of course the night terrors, those are also a common symptom or expression.
Sometime, if you want, I can show you a little process that we filmed that did a lot of healing for the boy and his family. It's such a sweet video where we go back to his the injection of the sucking out sperm from the father, and then the injection of that sperm into his egg cell. We could, maybe you and I should look at that together sometime. It might be interesting to, include in some of your research and references because you'll see it firsthand.
Right. Yeah, that sounds interesting.